So today we have lots in store for you. Just shortly, we will have one of our keynote discussions on climate change in Southeast Alaska. This later morning, we'll have for you two separate deep dive sessions, allowing you to engage more deeply in the themes of this year's conference, including climate change and investing in Alaska. And don't forget to stick around tonight, this afternoon, when we will reveal the secret location of tonight's raucous after summit party. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest, I guess I would say, this morning. We're lucky enough to have some comments previously recorded for us by Senator Lisa Murkowski. Senator Murkowski is the first Alaskan-born senator and only the sixth United States senator to serve our state. Murkowski is a third-generation Alaska, born in Ketchikan and raised in towns across the state, including Wrangell, Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. Since joining the United States Senate in 2002, Senator Murkowski has been a strong advocate for Alaska on energy, healthcare, education, military and veterans affairs, and infrastructure development. Please welcome me in joining Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Hello and welcome all of you who are attending the 2020 Innovation Summit. I want to thank the Juneau Economic Development Council for just this quick opportunity to provide some updates from Washington, what we're doing here in Congress to support innovation in Alaska as well as around the country, while at the same time we advance solutions to the very pressing issue of climate change. We all know in the state Alaska is experiencing the impacts of climate change in a unique and sometimes dramatic way. We see new challenges for communities emerge as sea ice declines, subsistence foods move, and permafrost thaws. At the same time, I think we also recognize that there are opportunities for Alaskans to leverage their ingenuity, their entrepreneurship, and their innovative spirit to improve livelihoods and to build more resilient communities. I think Alaskans are very uniquely positioned to meet climate change head-on as we focus on ways to adapt in new and exciting ways. I know it's challenging, I know it's daunting, but I also have great belief in the innovative nature of Alaskans. Here in Washington, we're doing some innovative things through the Energy and Natural Resources Committee here in the Senate. We've passed legislation to boost small-scale advanced nuclear reactors that can provide resilient, deployable energy, including into our rural communities. I've partnered with Senator Manchin of West Virginia to introduce legislation that will boost research and development for zero-emission geothermal energy. I know that that's something already being used there in Juneau through the ground source heat pumps there at the airport. So we're putting in place further legislation that can help in that area. Developing innovative energy and climate solutions, I think we know is critical, but we also need to invest in the next generation of Alaskans to ensure that our capacity to invent, develop, and innovate remains strong. So one of the fun things that I've been able to get involved with is the Fab Lab opportunity. I was pleased to be able to introduce the Fab Lab Network Act. And what we seek to do with this is to charter a national network of fabrication labs where students and community members can come together and invent, play, fabricate, craft, manufacture, but an extraordinary way, really an extraordinary way to boost our innovative capacity. On my seat on the Appropriations Committee, I have also been pushing to fund critical programs that support STEM education and capacity in the state, including the National Science Foundation's EPSCoR program and NASA's Alaska Space Grant Program in partnership there with UAF. I've also supported strong funding for the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency. ARPA-E, when we think of all the good that is coming out of the advanced research, spearheading the Mariner program to develop and scale marine algal biofuels. When you think about Alaska's mariculture industry and all that is happening there, it's really starting to take off. I think Alaska will be able to provide a renewable, innovative fuel source through marine biomass. It's exciting about our possibilities there. This year's Innovation Summit is really an opportunity for you to continue developing the bright ideas that will power our economy and improve our resilience as we address climate change. I'm excited to hear the outcomes of your discussions. I want to thank JEDC for all that you do to kind of bring together, to catalyze these great ideas, as well as support Alaska's prosperity. Thank you all. I wish you a productive summit. Take care.
Good morning. I'm Brian Holst, the director of the Juneau Economic Development Council. Great to be back here today. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce a representative from Tlingit-Haida Central Council. Will Ware is of the Duk-Dain-Ton clan. Will is from Petersburg and commutes weekly to work in Juneau. He works for Central Council of Tlingit-Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska as the Chief Officer of Project Development with responsibilities for business and economic development. So please join me in welcoming Will Ware.
Well, thank you very much. I am taking the place of President Peterson. He had another conflict this morning that he was trying to work around and just couldn't simply get out of it, and so here I am. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Brian, for inviting me. I do have a strong vested interest in economic development, not only in here at Juneau, but across our region. Obviously, as mentioned in my introduction, I work for Tlingit and Haida. I'm the Chief Officer with responsibilities of project development and most recently business and economic development. Some of you, I think, went around and did a little bit of a tour of a couple of our facilities that we had started over the last couple of years of a Sacred Shrine, as well as one of our coffee shops. We're looking at opening up another facility or another coffee shop here at Bartlett Hospital later this month, as soon as we just get our permitting and approvals done through the DEC. I commute each week. I live in Petersburg. I work here in Juneau, and I own a small native arts gallery and gift store. I had over in my past have run Petersburg Indian Association for a number of years, both served on that board of directors and then ran the tribe as the administrator. After that, I owned a small seafood processing plant, Tonka Seafoods. We did custom processing and then moved on into much larger just seafood processing at wholesale markets. So I have a background and a real drive and an interest in business and certainly economic development, and primarily in our smaller communities. Is something that just excites me. And so when I had an opportunity here last night, asked to speak and to give a welcome for the Innovation Summit, I jumped at it because this is something that is truly exciting for me. And I just want to encourage all of you to continue with these sessions that you're participating yesterday and today, and to network and to be able to work with one another to think outside the box for what it is to meet the needs of our community right here in Juneau. As I said, I own a small art gallery in Petersburg, and as I think I have this pendant, it's a halibut hook pendant, and I'm oftentimes asked about it and asked if it was truly an effective means of getting halibut. And it is an extremely effective means of harvesting halibut. But there's a real deep story about just really why is it so effective. Our Tlingit people were extremely innovative. And I'd like to say they've learned to master this region, but as those of you who have lived here for very long, especially if you're a multi-generation or if you've just lived here for a number of years, you realize that there really isn't very many places in Alaska that you could truly tame. But we lived in harmony among this land here for thousands of years. Part of this innovation of just this simple halibut hook that just reminds me of how innovative our people were, it gives me encouragement to think outside the box, is that this halibut hook, once it was set down with woven lines of cedar down to the bottom where they would take this hook and they would attach a rock to the bottom of it. They would put the bait and lash it to the bottom of this hook. The line that was woven from cedar and spruce would go up to the top, and sometimes a seal bladder was used. A seal bladder was used as a buoy, otherwise a carved piece of wood. People were thinking, well, that's pretty incredible. But that's not the most incredible aspect of the halibut hook. The most incredible aspect of the halibut hook is the distance between the top of the barb and the inside, this shank here, and the inside of the hook would determine the size of the halibut that they would harvest. They weren't interested, or people weren't interested in going out in canoes and harvesting 200, 300, 400-pound halibut. They were interested in harvesting halibut that they could bring up easy enough within a canoe and safely. Incredible engineering for even the smallest of tools that we used. It was innovative. It was done through trial and error. It was done through failures and successes. And through time, dedication, hard work, and sharing of knowledge with one another. Truly, when I started just to looking into what this Innovation Summit was about, really, that's really what's happening right here and right now, isn't it? It's an opportunity to be sharing ideas, to be thinking outside the box, to be coming up with innovative ideas that promote the economic growth of our region and our community. So I'm excited to be able to provide you this welcome here this morning, and I encourage you to continue to stick through it throughout the rest of this day and to stay in touch with one another, to take your business cards, hold them in a safe spot. Don't let them sit on a counter in your bedroom or wherever it is that you store them, but to hold them close and to look at them often, to utilize that networks that you guys are creating here now. So welcome. Thank you very much. Ganachchish, and we'll talk to you soon.
Excellent. I now get to introduce to you two of our keynote speakers for this morning. We have Allison Bidlack. Allison is the director of the Alaska Coastal Rainforest Center at the University of Alaska Southeast. Dr. Bidlack is an ecologist with over 15 years of experience working in the North Pacific Coast temperate rainforest. Her current work focuses on terrestrial marine linkages, how climate change is impacting ecosystem processes along this coastal margin, and how communities are being impacted and can respond to these changes. She is joined on stage today by Tom Thornton, who is the Dean of Arts and Sciences and Vice Provost of Research and Sponsored Programs at the University of Alaska Southeast, as well as an affiliate professor at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute. His research focuses on the socio-ecological relations between people, land, and waters of Southeast Alaska and the North Pacific, and also on climate change adaptation and ecocultural sustainability in both rural and urban environments from North America to Eurasia to Africa. Please welcome me in joining Allison Bidlack and Tom Thornton.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me here today. Many of you heard John Walsh give a talk yesterday about climate change in Alaska, and I will be focusing on climate change in Southeast today. And I'm going to be talking about some of the innovative ways that researchers are approaching these problems, looking at climate change and looking at the changes to the resources that we depend on. And then Tom will follow up on my talk and talk about some of the ways that communities and businesses are adapting to these changes. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a whirlwind tour, and I've got about 20 minutes to do it, so let's dive in. Let's see, how does this work? All right, so over the next 100 years or so, it's predicted that we're going to be seeing a warming trend across Southeast Alaska. We're also going to be seeing probably more precipitation, particularly in the northern part of the Panhandle. And as temperatures warm, unfortunately, for those of us that like skiing, most of that precipitation will be falling as rain rather than snow. And that's what you see here. The purple is snowfall, and we're seeing less and less of that as we go through the centuries. Superimposed on top of this trend of warming and wetting, we actually have a bit of climate instability as well. We've seen that in the past few years with the drought, the severe drought that we've experienced in Southeast Alaska. And at the same time, we're getting more frequent and more severe storms. This is an atmospheric river that hit the northern Gulf of Alaska in November 2018, and we're seeing more and more of this. So just keep in mind that we've got these trends that are moving towards a warmer and wetter climate here, but also superimposed on that, we have a lot of variability across space and time. So I'm going to dive into just the impacts of some of these climate changes on our ecosystems and the resources that we depend on. We'll start with the cryosphere. This is the Mendenhall Glacier. As we all know, we're seeing some really dramatic changes in that glacier. The Mendenhall, I don't have a pointer here, but the Mendenhall Glacier is the little lobe that's at the bottom of the Juneau ice field there. Over the next century, it's predicted that this ice field is going to be reduced in surface area by about 66%. It could look like that by 2100, which is pretty startling. And that's going to have dramatic changes on our local climate and our local weather here in terms of the Taku winds we get in the wintertime, the differences in temperature you get from downtown to out the road, the amount of snow and the amount of rain that we get. The other change to our cryosphere is this. We're seeing a dramatic decrease in the number of tidewater glaciers here in the state. We had 50 in 1975, and we're down to 36 now. That has big implications for what you see in this picture, glacier tourism, but it also has really big implications for the animals that depend on these glacial fjord ecosystems, like harbor seals and seabirds. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, and that's going to be one of the themes of this talk, is that climate change is neither negative or positive, depending on sort of what you're looking at. While certain animals are suffering from this decline in the number of tidewater glaciers, other habitats are doing much better. So in places like Glacier Bay, for example, where we've seen lots of glacial recession, there are hundreds of kilometers of new freshwater habitat opening up, and new runs of coho and pink salmon are moving into those habitats. So it's positive and it's negative. With the recession of glaciers and ice fields, we're also seeing more incidences of glacial outburst floods around the state. Those of you who live here in Juneau are well acquainted with Suicide Basin and what happens every year. Glacial outburst floods can result in situations like this. This is the Backloop Bridge at Mendenhall. This is from several years ago. We had as much water running down the Mendenhall River as we have running down the Colorado River some years at the peak flow of this. So this is a lot of water. You can see how much water is hitting the stanchions of that bridge. This is a real problem, and we need to understand how glacial outburst floods happen and be able to predict them better. This is Suicide Basin, and this film it was created by taking one photograph a day over a period of about 4 months, and it's going to keep replaying. So it starts in May, and you can see Suicide Basin gradually filling up with water, and then suddenly releasing all that water underneath the Mendenhall Glacier in mid-July or so. There's a whole team of researchers working up here from the university, from USGS, from the state, and from the city and borough of Juneau. They're using instrumentation, remote sensing instrumentation on drones. They're using very precise GPS units. They're using instruments that measure the depth of the water here. And they're using very sophisticated computer modeling to better understand the dynamics of this system. The techniques that they're using here and the models that they're producing are also applicable to glacier outburst floods or glacially dammed lakes in other parts of the state. And those are increasingly serious issues around the state, in Prince William Sound and in the Kenai Peninsula. All right, so snow, of course, is another part of our cryosphere, and snow is what drives avalanches here. We have a pretty good understanding of what causes avalanches, but again, as our climate changes, we are faced with a situation that is unusual for us. I did talk about how we may have less snow in the future, but remember, I also talked about how we may have more severe and more frequent storms. So just last week, we've had a lot of snow this year. Just last week, we had another big storm move through with a lot of rain. The road to Thane was closed down because of severe avalanche activity. And that sort of thing may be happening more and more often. And so what we're trying to do is understand the dynamics of that system as well. This lower photograph is from 2008. This is when the large avalanches knocked out the Snettisham power lines. And you can see the twisted transmission tower there, and then that huge debris field behind it from the avalanche. These are the avalanche paths above Juneau. Juneau is actually the most at-risk urban area in the United States. We have 5 large avalanche paths right above town, and we don't have a really great idea on how often those avalanches let go and what causes them to move. This is many years ago, the city hired a research institute from Switzerland to create a large-scale avalanche model for Juneau. And can you make that run again, that video? So they used basic climate models, average snow depth, average temperatures, and they created this model of what a large avalanche might look like on the Barons Avenue slide path. And as it goes down, you can see there's, of course, houses at the bottom of that slide path, but a large avalanche basically would take out the whole neighborhood at the bottom of that slide path, run across the highway, and into the harbor. All right, well. So again, a similar team to the team that's working in Suicide Basin is also working on this avalanche slide path, as well as the slide paths near Eagle Crest, and there we go. So that's a little bit disturbing, not only in terms of loss of life, but also the disruption to Juneau if the highway is covered like that, and that would take several days to probably clear out. So a team is working on this avalanche slide path as well as avalanche slide paths in other parts of Southeast Alaska, and again, using remote sensing instruments on drones to get a better handle on the snowpack on Mount Juneau and other high elevation areas. They're also using some really innovative methodology of looking at tree rings on the trees around these slide paths to better understand what the return interval of these large avalanches are. So that is going on right now. And one of the other themes of this talk, in addition to climate change being both good and bad, challenges and opportunities, is the lack of data that we have generally in Alaska. One thing that we struggle with a lot is the lack of weather station data at high elevation. All of our weather stations, almost all of them, are at sea level, where our airports are. We know very little about weather up in the mountains, and particularly we know very little about the snowpack up in the mountains, how much snow there is, and how wet that snow is. And that's really important when you're talking about trying to predict avalanches, not just here in Juneau, but throughout the state. One of the really innovative programs that's going on right now is this Community Snow Observations Program. Citizens can download an app on their phone, and when they're out in the backcountry on their snow machine or on their backcountry skis, they can take their avalanche probe, punch it into the snow, take the data on how deep the snowpack is, put it into the app, and then those data get uploaded to a global database. And scientists can actually use those data to ground truth the models that we have of snowpack throughout the state, and they're actually then using those data to put them into models like that Barons Avenue avalanche model, so that we can, again, better understand how our changing conditions are going to be impacting the dynamics of the things we really care about. Of course, snow affects everything downstream as well, right? It affects hydrology, it affects the amount of water we have in our streams and in our reservoirs. Over the past several years with the drought, there were stories about drying streams, streams that had the temperature was too warm, fish kills. So we're interested in what these changes to hydrology are. So these are just some these aren't real hydrographs, but what this is showing you is the difference between what a snow-dominated versus a rain-dominated watershed might look like. So on the left is snow-dominated, and what you see here is that generally in the fall and the winter months, you tend to have low flow in streams, but when the snow melts, you get this big peak in discharge in the spring and early summer. It's very different from a rain-dominated system, where generally your higher flows are in the fall and winter when we get these big storms moving through here in Southeast, but you tend to have low flows in the summertime. So again, as we change from a rain-dominated or a snow-dominated to a rain-dominated regime here in Southeast Alaska, we're going to start seeing changes like this happen in individual watersheds and across the region. This, of course, has huge implications for everyone's favorite fish here, salmon. So this is going to affect salmon run timing. It's going to affect the survival of eggs and fry over winter. Changes in hydrology are also going to affect the way we plan our infrastructure, our culverts and our bridges. And it's going to affect these larger projects too, our hydropower and drinking water reservoirs. So again, we have to understand what these changes look like and how fast they're going to happen. I talked earlier about the lack of data in the state. Similar to high elevation weather stations, very few of our rivers and streams in this state are gauged compared with the lower 48. So we have very little information, real information on what's going on. One of the ways we get around that is by downscaling the information that we do have. So in the upper panel there is, that's the monthly average temperature across the state of Alaska. That's based on a global climate model. It's very, very coarse. You can see Southeast Alaska is covered by about 2 squares, so it doesn't give us that much information that's useful to planning. what we do, my colleagues at the University of Alaska and John Walsh, who talked yesterday, as part of these efforts, we take these global climate models, we put in real data on topography and weather that we have, and we downscale them to a scale that is more easily usable. And so what that looks like here in Southeast Alaska is something like this. We start with a 75-kilometer global model, and we've downscaled, at this point, we're just wrapping up a 4-kilometer downscaled model. And what that's going to allow us to do is that this is average precipitation, right? But then we can extrapolate discharge from a model like this. So even though we don't have gauges in some streams, we can actually predict with some degree of certainty how much water will be coming out of streams at a certain time, say 20 years, 30 years, 40 years into the future. And that's going to help us plan our infrastructure and other projects a little bit better. These changes in temperature and precipitation are also affecting land cover and vegetation. One of the things that we're seeing throughout the state and in Southeast Alaska is the rise in tree line, and so the shrinking of some of our alpine areas. That has big implications for alpine obligates, such as mountain goats, and it's particularly concerning in some place like Southeast Alaska, where some of these populations are already on islands. So as you lose your alpine areas, there's not going to be any place for some of these populations to go. These kinds of changes in tree line we can also see them in the amount of forestry you have. These are data from the Forest Service. They're from a paper by my colleagues Brian Bioma and Tara Barrett. And what you see here is on the x-axis, from left to right, you're going from south to north. And what you see is gains in forest area. Those are the green bars. So in the northern part of the Panhandle, we're actually seeing a lot of gains in forest area. We're also seeing gains in forest biomass. And I want to point out that this does not include any sites that were previously logged, so this doesn't have anything to do with regrowth of logged areas. This is simply what's happening as a result of a warming climate. We're getting more forest area. It's not all rosy, though. As many of you know, yellow cedar are experiencing a widespread mortality event, and that is due to climate change as well. So while other trees are doing better, yellow cedar are not doing as well. Yellow cedar have shallow root systems, and they tend to, when there's low snowpack and you have hard frosts in the spring, those roots can be damaged, and 1 or 2 hard frosts can kill a mature tree. We've got about 700,000 acres of dead yellow cedar on the Tongass alone, and we are seeing that spreading north and west up into Sitka, Peril Strait region. So that is an ongoing concern as well. And those forests that were once dominated by yellow cedar are tend to transition to a western hemlock-dominated forest. Okay, so we're also seeing changes to our ocean. We're seeing changes to our food webs. We're seeing changes to ocean chemistry. And one of the really neat and innovative projects is this project here that's run by CTOR. It's the Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research Program. And these folks, it's a consortium of over a dozen tribes here in Southeast Alaska. Environmental coordinators or technicians go out every week or two. They gather shellfish samples. They send those samples back to a state-of-the-art lab that the Sitka tribe runs. And those are then processed for paralytic shellfish toxins. And then CTOR puts out advisories about every week, particularly in the summertime, about what beaches are hot and what beaches are not hot, if you will. Almost every, if not every, coastal state has a shellfish monitoring program except for Alaska. There's one lab that's run by DEC, that's in Anchorage, and they process commercial shellfish samples. They generally tend not to do community samples. So CTOR stepped into this gap and has been providing really crucial information to communities here. DEC and CTOR now share data, and we're working with CTOR to combine the PST data that they're gathering with environmental data so that we can try to get a better handle on what are the environmental drivers of harmful algal blooms and paralytic shellfish toxin events in Southeast Alaska and around the state. The other project that's going on right now is looking at ocean chemistry. So many of you have heard about ocean acidification. The more carbon dioxide we pump into the atmosphere, the more the ocean takes that up. And when the ocean takes up CO2, that drives the pH down and changes the carbonic chemistry of the water. 2 years ago, we installed instruments on the Columbia When this boat runs, it runs the route from Bellingham to Skagway. The instruments on that boat pull in seawater every 3 minutes, and they measure salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and the amount of carbon dioxide in the water. There's also a sensor on the deck of the boat that measures atmospheric carbon dioxide. And we're learning some really, really interesting things about this. So this animation is showing on the map, you can see the boat running back and forth along the coast. And then here is showing one of the data streams that's coming out of this. What this is a metric of how corrosive the water is in Southeast Alaska and BC. And the colors, so colors that are red or gray are considered corrosive to shell-building organisms like diatoms or bivalves or crab. What you see here in this animation is in the wintertime, our waters are pretty corrosive. That is naturally what happens in Alaska. As you move from winter into spring, those colors change from red and gray into the yellow and green and blue. And that's a natural phenomenon. That's the phytoplankton in the water that are starting their spring bloom. As it warms up and there's more sunshine, they're pulling carbon dioxide out of the water and they're changing the water chemistry. So that's an interesting pattern that we see. What's even more interesting, though, is some of the spatial patterns that you see, and it's hard for me to point this out, but you can kind of see a band of gray and red along the bottom there. That's Johnstone Strait. That's east of Vancouver Island. You can see where the gray is east of Vancouver Island. That's always corrosive. And there's other areas in Southeast Alaska that are similar. So on the very top, the Lynn Canal is almost always corrosive. The areas around the mouth of the Stikine are often corrosive as well. So this is telling us something that we didn't know. This is literally the best data set we have in the world on nearshore ocean chemistry and the variability across space and time. It's important for, as scientists, it's important for us to sort of, it's been really invaluable in learning about the dynamics of the system. It's also interesting because those corrosive areas have everything to do, not everything, some of them have a lot to do with the fresh water that's coming off the landscape. So kind of circling back to where I started this talk and changes in the cryosphere, the melting of glaciers and ice fields is having a big impact, not just on hydrology, but on nearshore chemistry as well. These data are also crucial to folks that are thinking about mariculture and running shellfish farms or building shellfish farms, and I'm gonna have Tom talk about that in a second. But before he runs up here, I just want to thank and acknowledge all the partners and funders that are involved in all of these research projects. I'm sure I'm missing some here, but I just wanted to acknowledge them. And with that, Tom, I'm going to hand it off to you.
So how do I advance the slide here?
Just this one.
Just
yeah.
this one,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Thank you, Allison. So I'm a social scientist, so I'm coming at the question of adaptation actually as an anthropologist. And so we tend to take a long view about adaptation, and we sometimes balk at the way the term is used in a very sort of narrow sense. But as I stand up here, I feel like I need to echo the words of Lisa Murkowski that adaptation is about responding to vulnerability, but it's also about opportunity. But I think I'm feeling on the vulnerable side right now, and I want to ask Allison, did you really have to show that avalanche video 3 times? Because my house is on Highland Drive, and I'm really feeling the vulnerability side of adaptation right now. And I remember when I bought the house, there is a map that has a line for that avalanche zone, but this is something that's true about nature, right? That zone might have been true, that line might have been a pretty sharp line at one time, but nature is complex, continuously evolving, and things are contingent, right? So as precipitation levels change, temperatures levels change, I think that line is probably becoming something more like a zone. And the question is, is my house in that zone? Or if not, what's the opportunity in my neighborhood, perhaps? But the same thing is true with adaptation. We need to think about adaptation as not just one thing, not just one innovation, but a complex set of processes. One way to think about adaptation is to remember those 3 C's, that it is complex, it is continuous. Even in our lifetime, our bodies are continuously adapting to our environments. And it is contingent. That is to say, it depends on what other elements, processes, actors in the ecosystem, whether it's a business ecosystem or a larger ecosystem, are doing. So remember those three things. And then two other important concepts, and we'll give you some more in the deep dives this afternoon. We need to think about level and scale. So when we talk about level, we're talking about me as an individual adapting as to where I purchase my house, or are we talking about what the city as a unit should be doing vis-a-vis these risks to neighborhoods, or are we talking at the global scale about the UNFCCC and a global governance model for mitigating anthropogenic impacts on climate change and governing an adaptation fund or whatever it is to respond at that whole human scale. And as we do that, I think it's very important to think also about adaptation processes. So we heard several good examples of innovations. I know the halibut hook is a standard. It's even won an award, I think, at this innovation forum because it essentially allowed the harvest of a fish that was otherwise fairly inaccessible, but as Will pointed out, it did it in a very selective way so that you weren't capturing every tiny halibut or every large halibut, but you were targeting the size you needed, and the device could be used very selectively in different environments. So it's an excellent example of what we're calling here innovation in the second to last slide. And that is the one, I think, in business that gets very much emphasized. And it's often a technical or technological innovation. But we should consider also social innovations. And here again, I might point to the Aboriginal inhabitants of this land as being exceptionally innovative on the social scale. In anthropological terms, Tlingit and Haida and other so-called Northwest Coast peoples are often seen as the most complex foragers, or they used to say hunter-gatherers, but now we know they also cultivate, peoples in the world, able to support large populations with a very complex social organization. And one reason for that is because you have a very dynamic environment here in Southeast Alaska. And it's been a very dynamic environment for a very long time. So while the Arctic is changing very, very rapidly, environmental change is old news here in Southeast Alaska. And the indigenous peoples of this area developed a complex, continuously adaptive social organization to respond to it. So just to problematize things a little further, we think about often in terms of level adaptation at the community scale. But communities or villages are modern-day constructions in Alaska. Most Aboriginal people had a level of mobility to begin with, and that's, of course, our number one human adaptation is we're mobile. Science tells us we originated in one area, somewhere in Africa, as a genetic species, and spread throughout the world. That's a miracle of adaptation that we could do that, but we do it because of mobility. But having become sedentarized in modern life, we're feeling the effects of an inability to adapt to environmental change inexpensively, right? So we have a number of Arctic communities that face having to relocate their villages because they don't have the same mobility they had originally. They're now dependent on infrastructure, and that becomes a very, very expensive problem. So mobility has been our friend, but we think of ourselves as more mobile, but in some ways we're not. We're captive to our sedentary communities. The other thing to think about mobility is, again, this is the contingency. People at the household level, say, at the individual level, are responding to climate change by becoming so-called climate refugees, right? When in the most vulnerable areas of the world, people are using mobility to escape. But states don't see that as an adaptation because when people start crossing borders without permits, how do states respond? They try to limit immigration. They build walls. And that's really a counter to human mobility as adaptation. Okay, so just to complete this list, and I won't say a lot about each one, but we'll give some examples. What we're trying to do here is develop a language to expand your thinking about adaptation processes. So mobility is one, and there's a definition there. Exchange, of course, which is the foundation of business, is a very, very important one, but we're not just talking about commercial exchange. We're talking about all kinds of social and informational exchanges of both material and symbolic goods. Rationing is a very important one because obviously endless consumption is always going to have environmental impacts and probably impacts on the climate, according to the science. But when we talk about rationing, we're talking about something broader than that. We can talk about storage as a form of rationing, right? And the development of storage is one of the great human inventions, right? The fact that we can freeze things, the fact that we can store energy in batteries is very, very important. So how we ration our resources over time, whether it's a season or longer, is a very, very important aspect of adaptation, but so is controlling consumption and limiting critical resources. The opposite of that is pooling, and Allison just mentioned a couple of examples of pooling, including these citizen science networks that have developed to do things like make localized snow observations and then pool them in an app or something like that so that people can get that information and respond adaptively in terms of where they're going to ski or drive or develop their property or whatever. And so pooling is a very, very important part of human adaptation. And again, it's a way of linking assets, but not just material assets like wealth, but also labor and knowledge across social groups. Then another common one you hear in the economic realm is diversification, right? Increasing the variety of food or income streams, production strategies, specializations, whatever it is, to enhance your business or your livelihood. Obviously very, very important. Intensification is a form of adaptation in the sense that if you can do something to increase the availability of resources by boosting their yield within a certain space or time, and you can do it sustainably, that's an acceptable strategy for adaptation. And then innovation, which is the obvious one, but again, think both about social innovations as well as material ones. And then finally, we can think about revitalization, which is taking older ideas, including maybe indigenous technologies and ways of organizing, and seeing if they have relevance in the future. So we see that in the Arctic with the return of the semi-subterranean house, for example, taking advantage of siting and some Arctic adaptations to increase energy efficiency, but also restoring habitats to create a more sustainable culture in environment. Okay, and I guess we have a couple of slides to look at this. So cruise ships in tourism are innovating, right? And we're innovating to respond to the expansion of tourism. One of the ways is by electrifying our docks so that ships can plug into shore power and not have to spew diesel exhaust in the harbor, which of course is a greenhouse gas and may contribute to climate change. But obviously another strategy would be rationing. That's a big issue that our community faces. Should we limit the total number of cruise ships or the amount of fuel that can be burned in this area, or the amount of waste that can be dumped in our landfills from this tourism industry? Those are big questions, and how we respond, obviously, is a question of adaptation. Allison mentioned that there is innovations in how we capitalize our resources. And so the old model in Southeast Alaska was timber harvest, okay? And most people now would agree that that harvest was not sustainable at its highest levels, and so a lot of it has gone away. But we still have tremendous value in our forests, and one response, which could be seen as adaptive, is to use the value of the standing forest as an asset. And so we have examples of both the Chugach forest and the Tongass being used through carbon markets as sources of payment for ecosystem services. So California groups will, in some cases, offset or use the carbon market to pay See Alaska, or I think it's Chugach Corporation, to not cut their timber, and they will pay for the ecosystem services that they're providing, including, of course, carbon sequestration. So that's an innovation of sorts. Okay, then intensification, an example might be, what to do with your yellow cedar or your spruce beetle bark damaged trees, right? They're going to die anyway. Can you make use of that resource in an intensified way while that process is going on, if you can't do something to mitigate it? That might be an acceptable form of intensification for a certain time scale in a certain space. Okay, and then is this the last slide? There's one more. Okay, you can tell we didn't rehearse. This is an example of ocean farming, okay, the so-called green wave model of ocean farming, which is using the sustainable development of the blue economy and trying to both develop new food sources from kelp forests, which include certain kinds of shellfish farming, like scallops and mussels, but also by reforesting the kelp forests in the ocean, using that to impact in a restorative way the carbon and nitrogen sinks in the oceans. So this is obviously a major source of potential economic development that we're looking at in Alaska and already investing in. So that would be an example of diversification, revitalization, and of course, innovation in terms of how it's done. Okay, and then finally, a local example of the Juneau Carbon Offset Program, which is a recent innovation of Renewable Juneau, and this is a way to mitigate your personal impacts on the environment by purchasing offsets, carbon offsets that can be used to help others move towards renewable energy. So that's an example of an innovative program that is both mitigation and adaptation. And I hope you learned the difference between those terms. But if not, I'll talk about it in the second deep dive. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Will, for orienting us this morning, and thank you, Allison and Tom, for touching on localizing the topic of business and a changing climate. Now we're going to move to our second theme, participatory creativity. And to help us get started, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Atwater. Steve Atwater serves as the Executive Dean of the Alaska College of Education at the University of Alaska Southeast. He joined the University of Alaska in 2014 after serving as superintendent of the Kenai Borough School District, where he was named Alaska's 2013 Superintendent of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Dean Steve Atwater.
Well, good morning. It's my pleasure to just say a few words with regard to innovation and education. My job primarily is to worry about the preparation of teachers, but I also, as Brian mentioned, have a long history with the K-12 environment. One of the things that came out of the late 90s is that school systems needed to prepare students for what's next, for the 21st century. And there was a lot of attention at that time given to the 4 C's, which is collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and communication. And school districts, in turn, started to do a lot more thinking and innovation with regard to how to prepare students for what's next. And as superintendent on the Kenai, I'll like to tell the story that I got a call from a principal who told me, be advised, you're probably going to get a call from a mother who's not very happy. And this mom was upset because her student had received a poor grade on a collaborative project. and the members of the team that had worked on the project all got the same grade, and she felt that it wasn't fair because her student was probably the one who worked the hardest, et cetera. Ironically, a few weeks later, I was invited to be part of a robotics competition, and I was giving out awards at the end of the competition, and lo and behold, I recognized the child that we were talking about's name as earning on the team that earned third place. And so I sort of cringed and says, is the mother going to be upset that this collaborative work for the robotics competition led to a less than first place finish? And of course it didn't, because collaboration in that instance was different from what the collaboration was in the classroom. And I mentioned this just to illustrate some of the tensions that exist inside of the K-12 system and also at the university level with innovation. When you're trying to begin and bring in new things, there's always a tension to pull back and to go against that. Currently, there's a lot of interest in standardizing a lot of what happens in education, and as part of that standardization comes a heavy dose of compliance. And when you have a heavy dose of standardization and compliance, what you don't have is innovation. And so it's really thrilling for me to be part of this conversation today and to have Dr. Clapp here to be part of the exercise we're going to do, because the collaboration and the innovation that is so necessary to prepare people for what is next can't be dismissed by those who are perhaps a little frustrated and want to insist on a standardization and a compliance atmosphere that quells the use for innovation. So it's my pleasure to just offer those few comments with regard to what's happening in education, and also to thank the summit for hosting us. From UAS, we have faculty here today and Juneau School District teachers that are going to be helping in this next exercise. And also, more importantly, that Dr. Clapp, that you're here, because without people like you coming up to Alaska and continuing to push on us, it's very easy to drift over to the standardization and the compliance side, which quells the innovations. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody, and good morning, and thank you again for joining us for this session on participatory creativity, where we're going to be talking about do it together. So really this idea of engaging in creativity from a very distributed and participatory perspective. Steve, thank you so much for the introduction. I think we're going to really push back on the whole idea of standardization in this session because we're not going to have a standard sort of summit experience. We're going to have a very interactive session that we're going to get to in just a second. This is a big experiment for us. I've done this workshop many times in groups of 30, 40 people, and then Brian said, can you do it for 200 people? So we're going to give that a shot. We're not quite 200 this morning as we were yesterday, but I have this great group of co-facilitators that's going to join us and help us have this wonderful and rich experience. I'm going to pass the microphone to them, and they're going to just briefly introduce themselves, say their name and where they're from, and then we'll kick into the session.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Souza from JEDC.
Hi, I'm Noelle Dursey. I'm from the school district here in Juneau.
I'm Virgil Fredenberg, and I'm at UAS in the College of Education.
I'm Brenda Taylor from the Juneau STEM Coalition.
Jerry Schoenberger, College of Education, UAS.
Elizabeth Kent with the Juneau School District.
Good morning, Steve Atwater, College of Ed, Dean.
I'm Amy Rautiainen with the Juneau School District.
I'm Lisa Richardson with UAS.
Hi, I'm Heather Batchelder with UAS, Alaska College of Education.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. You can take your seats. So they'll be joining us in just a second to help us out during this session. I want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do. So this is our plan for the next hour or so. First, we're going to have a quick review of the concept of participatory creativity that was introduced yesterday. I know that was a lot of information to digest, so we're going to give you some time to connect with a colleague and talk about your thoughts around that. Then we're going to jump into the bulk of our session, putting participatory creativity in action, and more information about that will follow very shortly. That's where we're going to spend the majority of our time. And then we're going to close out with a reflection activity, which is a Project Zero thinking routine, insights, puzzles, and implications. So that's the plan for this morning. Okay, let's jump in. So while you find your seats, I'm going to move us along. So if I could get attention back up to the main stage, we're going to do a quick review of the content that we engaged with yesterday. So I'm just going to share some slides to jog our memories from some things that we discussed yesterday, and then we'll do a small activity at our table to reflect on those concepts. So I introduced this notion from my colleague Vlad Glavino that we have these different narratives around creativity over time. We started with this he narrative of this kind of eminence theory of genius that was unreachable. Creativity was just something that some people were able to do and was very gendered. And then we had this I narrative that everyone was able to be creative. And then we broke away from an individual approach to creativity for this more we narrative, a more distributed approach to creativity. And that's the space that we're exploring today. I mentioned that that individual focus on creativity largely came from the work of J.P. Guilford, but many others at the time, where there was this emphasis on genius starting after World War II in the beginning of the Cold War. So we had this kind of genius model of creativity that Vlad would call the he model. And then we talked about, but participatory creativity, more distributed approaches to creativity are really all around us, and it's how we invent and innovate. We don't do so in isolation. We do so by the interaction of individuals and small groups. And then we talked about, well, we talked about him, but we shared this story about biodegradable, about a really distributed approach to invention and innovation that came from that after-school program in Boston and Massachusetts. And then lastly, I shared information about how we can break down these hero ideas by using Kurt Cobain as an example, that he wasn't an individual genius, he was really part of a broader community developing the idea of grunge rock. And I shared a couple of definitions. Creativity is a distributed process of idea development that takes place over time and incorporates the contribution of a diverse network of actors, each of whom uniquely participate in the development of ideas in various ways. And then I define ideas as an idea as something that may be understood as an ever-evolving conceptual through line that is embodied through a succession of innovative products. And these products range from concrete objects to utterances and speech acts, the things we say, and they serve as the artifacts of ever-evolving creative ideas. And then lastly, I gave these 4 key points. No feat of excellence ever occurs in isolation. Creativity is always distributed amongst many different individuals. And when we shift the focal point of creativity from individuals to ideas, we provide the opportunity for all people to participate in the development of those creative ideas. And then when we tell the story or the biography of creative idea of development, this allows us to see how innovative ideas emerge and how various individuals contribute or participate to creative idea generation along the way. And then that last one there, individuals play various roles when they participate in creativity, but those roles are neither fixed nor unidimensional, but always dynamic and changing. And we're going to really draw on that bit today when we engage in the activity that we do. We're going to see the distributed nature of creativity, specifically in a problem-solving activity, and the different roles that might emerge. But right now, what I'd like you to do is just spend some time either pair share or in small groups at your table. Take about 5 to 6 minutes just to reflect on these concepts and these ideas that were introduced yesterday, using, again, another Project Zero thinking routine, Connect, Extend, Challenge. So connect, how do these ideas connect to things that you already know about invention and innovation? Extend, how do these ideas extend what you already know about invention and innovation? And then challenge, what questions or puzzles or challenging things are coming to the surface for you? So let's spend about 5 or 6 minutes, pair share, so talk to a partner, or talk in your small groups about how these ideas connect, extend, or challenge your perspectives on invention and innovation. So go do that. Talk in small groups at your table. All right, let's come back together. Okay. So thank you very much for engaging in that conversation and using this thinking routine. Just want to hear a couple of thoughts from folks who might have a big idea rising to the surface or a big question rising to the surface. Would anyone like to share? Yeah, just shout it out. How do you work with a whole bunch of introverts? You put them together at one table. But a big point of this, and I tried to make it yesterday, is I'm not promoting a theory of group work. That could be beneficial in many different ways, but instead just really differentiating, and when people need to work by themselves, they certainly can work by themselves. There's a popular book called Quiet. Many of you might have heard from it, and advocates for that book in environments like this say, Edward, have you ever heard the book Quiet? And there's this whole idea that even when people are working by themselves, they're still participating in broader communities of culture. They're still participating with their past collaborations. So as a facilitator and instructor, if somebody really just needs to work by themselves, I would encourage that and let them see the ways that they can connect to other resources when they do that. So this is not an advocacy for group work, even though that is indeed what we're doing today. Okay, thank you for that question. Sir, nice and loud. Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned products and then sort of the longer arc of work and the people that participate in it. And I make this subtle difference between products and ideas. And I say that products are the artifacts of bigger ideas. So we can have many products along the way, but the idea is an ever-evolving through line, and the products move the ideas forward. And of course, many people contribute to the development of those diverse products as an idea evolves. Wonderful point. Yeah, nice and loud back there, Courtney. That's not loud.
I volunteered these
Okay.
because there was an interesting discussion here about some of the challenges that I was listening in while you guys were talking about creativity being the context and outside the social structure.
Oh gosh. All right. I guess one of the things we talked about was challenging the concept of original thought. If if we can truly do something innovative, or if we're always constantly synthesizing. And I guess I'll hand it off to somebody else to extend that challenge and where the rest of that conversation went. Yeah.
Okay. Well, coming off an adaptation talk, when we think about innovation as adaptation, it's not just the diversity of the group and the people thinking, but it's the stress, the environmental stress, the selective forces, and so how important is setting and context in this? So.
Great, great, great. And in some of my more formal work when I write this stuff up, I would talk about those environmental forces as being actors within the development of an idea. So inanimate objects, non-people participants, can have agency in the development of ideas because animate folks, people, engage with those inanimate objects. So really thinking of those actors as having agency, even though they might not be flesh and blood actors like ourselves. Yeah, so, and then the first point about original thought, I think there's original contributions that can be made into ongoing ideas or thoughts that wend their way through time. So you can make an original contribution. I hesitate to use the word an original thought, because I wonder if any thought is truly original in that it might be uttered for the first time, so indeed it is, but it's developed by the contributions of all that person's past collaborations. That thought would not have emerged had that person not developed the knowledge, experience, social interactions that she or he had done before. Okay, so thank you so much, and I know that there's a lot more to unpack and many more ideas to engage with, but we're gonna get into the interactive part of this session. So here's what we're going to do. In just a moment, I'm gonna offer you a design challenge, and that design challenge is gonna use the materials in the room. So there's 4 different stations with all different stuff on it that our colleagues here in the school district, the University of Alaska, JEDC have kindly brought in from their recycle bins and other places for us to work with this morning. But before we do that, and we're gonna work in small groups, before we do that, one person in each group is going to have the important job of being an observer. So groups are about 4 or 5 people. So we're going to have the majority of people in the group be doers, so engaging with this prompt, and then one person in the group being an observer, so really taking note about what's happening, okay? So very quickly, in your small groups, choose which person will be the observer, and then observers, you're going to connect with our co-facilitators in the room. And co-facilitators, if you could just make yourself known to which tables you're overseeing, they'll brief you on what your prompts are as an observers. So really quickly, designate an observer. Observers talk to the co-facilitators. The rest of you can kind of get to know each other or continue the previous conversation as they're briefed very quickly. Okay, so designate an observer. All right, and observers, you can take your seats. Let's come back together. It's a great tool, it really is, but it gets less effective every time you use it, which is an interesting phenomenon. Okay, so we're going to jump in. Observers have been briefed about what they're going to do as we jump into this design challenge activity. And observers, I just want to let you know that you're allowed to participate in the activity as much as you'd like, but just don't abandon your role as observers. And after we're done with this whole experience, we'll ask you to share with your small groups what it is you noticed. So just keep that in mind. And you're welcome to take notes on the sheet of paper you've been given, in your notebook, on a digital device, with video, audio. You can sketch however you're comfortable taking notes and recording documentation. Okay, all right, so here we go. We're ready to jump in. So we're gonna work in small groups at our different tables. And the prompt for this challenge is this. Using the materials in the room, develop or build a contraption that conveys a rubber ball to the ground as slowly as possible when dropped from a height of 5 feet. Observers, where's the rubber balls? Okay, they've got the balls, okay? So the prompt again is, using the materials in the room, develop a contraption or build a contraption that can convey a rubber ball to the ground as slowly as possible when dropped from a height of 5 feet. So I just want to point something out about the materials. There's lots of different stuff there. There's lots of what would be recycled cardboard. There's also these kind of safety box cutters out there. They sort of look like this. They're supposed to be designed so that you can't cut yourself. But I want to warn anybody, anytime anybody says a tool can't hurt you, you'll find a way. Okay, so just be careful when using these tools. Remember, cut cardboard on cardboard, respect the table, the furniture, the floors, your colleagues, and always remember safety third. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, so there's one more crucial piece of information, and that is your time. You have 20 minutes. Go. I just need your attention for a second. I totally forgot some of the rules. So the ball has to fall to the ground as slowly as possible, but in less than 30 seconds. So infinity is not an option, and the only people that can use a digital timing device are the co-facilitators you're working with, okay? 4 more minutes, go ahead. Wrapping it up at this point, 60 seconds. "45 seconds, 45 more seconds. Last 30 seconds to go, 30 more seconds. "15 seconds, 15 more seconds. Okay, just another 10 seconds. Very last touches, 10 more seconds. 5 seconds, 5 more seconds to go. 4 seconds. Really long seconds. 3. 2 more seconds. One more second. Okay, that's it. Pencils down. Hands up. Okay, great. So thank you for jumping in, everybody. I've been walking around the room. There's some really exciting contraptions happening in here, and we definitely met the challenge from Steve Atwater and have not stuck to standardization for a conference experience. But now let's see how these things work. So here's what's going to happen. Our co-facilitators are overseeing 1, 2, maybe 3 tables. What they're going to do is they're going to work with you. You're going to test out your machines and show them how they work. So they're going to say, ready, set, go, and then time your machine, and then you're going to check out the other machines in the pods of people around you that the co-facilitators are working with, okay? Is that clear, co-facilitators? Okay, let's spend about 5 minutes testing out these machines. Go for it. Okay. Bravo, everybody, bravo. Let's all grab a seat and sit in our small groups. Let's sit in our small groups. Okay, everybody grab a seat. Okay, if I can get your attention, we want to reflect on our experiences now. So thank you everybody for jumping into that making and creative problem solving activity. But we do want to take this chance to reflect on our experiences and especially to hear from our observers. So here's what we're going to do. Behind me, well, first there's a picture of our friend John Dewey, who reminds us we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So we're going to reflect on the work that we just did right now, remembering the whole participatory creativity lens that we've been wearing or looking through, but also just this experience we just had. So these prompts are very similar to the prompts that the observers had, and they are what moves did you or your colleagues make throughout your process of idea development and creative problem solving? How did your team's contraption change or evolve, if it did at all? Who contributed to the evolution of the ideas you're working on? And what roles might have emerged, if any? And where did new information come? Where did new ideas come from? And then the last one, which wasn't a prompt the observers has, what surprised you about this experience? So for the next 3 minutes, we're going to sit quietly in the room and reflect on these experiences ourselves. Observers, collect your thoughts and your notes, however you'd like to do it. And then after the 3 minutes, you'll share first with your small group about what you observed from the process based on these prompts. And then doers, those of you who are making, just think about these prompts or however else you'd like to reflect on these experiences. And after your observers in your group share, then you'll share what your experience was like as a doer. The co-facilitators will facilitate those conversations, but let's start with 2 to 3 minutes of quiet reflection. Go ahead. As you are ready, observers, share with your small group your reflections, what you observed from this process. And then co-facilitators, just negotiate that conversation, 2 or 3 minutes for observers to share. And then when it feels right, let's have the doers share their experience as well. And we'll do this for about 10 minutes. So go ahead. Okay, finish up your final thought. And let's come together. Okay, thank you for jumping into that reflection activity and for sharing the experience with your colleagues. We're pretty much at our time, but we started late, so we're going to go on for another couple of minutes. And I'd just like to hear from the group some of the insights, puzzles, or implications that are surfacing for you, not just only from participating in this workshop, but also from the content that I presented yesterday, the conversations you've been having with your colleagues, and certainly the information and content that's been presented by the other speakers. So insights would be any ahas or new ideas that are coming to the surface for you right now. Puzzles would be any questions or big puzzles or challenges that you have at the moment. And then implications would be ways that you are thinking about perhaps applying some of these concepts or ideas in your practice, in your industry, whatever that practice or industry might be. So maybe about 5 minutes or 5 or 6 different thoughts from the group. And it could be any one of these, insights, puzzles, or implications, or anything you'd like to share. Would anyone like to kick us off? Yes, sir. Hold on one second. Can you start that over?
Team forming is difficult. If I'm writing a scientific paper and I need co-authors, today it was easy. It was a sign. We just were thrown together.
So we have to think about and be strategic about how we develop our teams. And I mentioned a little bit about that yesterday, emphasizing the importance of diversity, especially diversity of different perspectives. Yeah, it's one thing when we just throw you in and you get a card and you're in that team. But how do we think strategically about forming teams to be most impactful? Thank you, sir. Other people like to share? Sure, right over here.
I thought about this in the context of startups versus a traditional business, because this process was very much like a startup, in that we had, our first idea was a zigzag contraption, right? That's what we went to the investors with, but what we ended up presenting and selling was completely different. It was based on all the people and what they brought to the table. So it solved the same problem mostly, but it was completely different than our original intent.
Great, thank you for sharing. I think that connects to what one of the judges said yesterday, that you're wrong and you have to be open to being wrong. And if you think that you're right all the time, then your original idea might not be the most successful idea. So thank you for being wrong. There's one over there.
Two things. One is once materials appeared at the table and we had kind of a shared vision, everybody participated in some way. So everybody kind of found their place inside the process. And we even had some participation from a neighboring group when we weren't sure, well, are we really at 5 feet? And someone magically appeared with a tape measure. So it's that intergroup collaboration and participation, not just inside your group, but taking ideas and insights and help from groups outside of the one you're working with.
Great, great. So a couple of interesting things there. You mentioned initially that when the materials showed up, you kind of coalesced around an idea and everyone participated. And that kind of connects to a comment we had earlier from our colleague that presented on adaptation, this whole idea that materials have agency and they're active players in the process. But then also that piece about, well, what is the group? And where are the boundaries of the group? And when do we invite in new information? Do we even need to think of it in terms of a group, or is it more fluid than that? So wonderful, thank you for sharing. Maybe a couple more. We've got 2 over here, maybe 1 and then 2. She's coming.
So somebody in the group had a pretty divergent idea and then sought support and validation for that idea, and then we moved forward on it. And we were talking about how if you are the person with a divergent idea and you are working alone, you might question that and maybe think, oh, that might not work, or maybe it's not, within the bounds of what we're supposed to be doing. But as a group, you can kind of give energy and support to an idea that may be really outside the box.
So kind of the issue of persuasion almost comes in. When you have an idea you want to sell or at least try out, how do you go about persuading your colleagues to give it a shot? And how do your colleagues open themselves to ideas that might be left of center of where you were going? Thank you. And yourself?
Tangible results in the last 10 seconds exceeded probably our first 10 minutes.
Say more.
When we were down to the wire, everyone was grab tape and go. We weren't really contemplating what we were doing or analyzing what we were doing. It was just on the clock.
Yeah, and you just had to make it happen. And that is a frequent kind of outcome of this experience. Kind of connects to a hallway conversation I had with Courtney this morning about a group of innovators that just made it happen. They work with what they got, and it's that sort of, it's go time. That just, maybe that's where some of our best ideas come from. Wonderful, great. I think we have time for one more. There's a hand back there. We're coming with the microphone.
So I was personally worried about being in a group with people I didn't know, but in the end we determined we did really well, and we came up with a team name which says why we did well: 4 women and a yoga instructor.
4 women and a yoga. Can't go wrong with that. That's great. There's actual research on the social phenomena that you're describing. When strangers are put into group brainstorming activities together, they're really polite with one another and they kind of listen to others' ideas. But when people who really know each other, or like coworkers or siblings, are working, it's like, shut up, give me that. So there's this whole idea of like how not knowing somebody has an impact on the group dynamics. Thank you all so much for playing with us and for wrestling with these big ideas. I think play is a part of learning, and learning is a part of innovating. So I hope all of those things connect, and that these concepts and ideas will find their way into your practice, your industry, your startups, your innovation as you move forward. So just want to offer my thanks. I want to especially thank the co-facilitators that helped us during this session. I'd never done this at scale, so you guys were really instrumental. I appreciate it. Thank you to the microphone runner, and thank you again to my tech folks in the back who make all this wonderful stuff happen up here. So here's the deal. Cleanup. So clean up, everybody, everywhere. Who's got a toddler? Okay, so what we're going to do is, if it looks like we can use it again, then put it back on the tables, like things with like things. If it doesn't look like we can use it again, we'll put a recycling pile in the back, or there's garbage cans, and I saw Becca pulling out big black bags in the back. But don't do that yet, don't do that yet. Brian has a couple of words about what happens next. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you. That was fabulous. Did not disappoint. He said it works for 40. We're like, if it can work for 40, it can work for 500, right? And it did. That was wonderful. So a couple comments to get everybody ready to go for what's happening next. We did hear a comment that somebody said, I'm not sure what angel investing is, and this is the right place to learn about that. And so we have a couple deep dives for you, and I'm going to invite those people that organize deep dives to say a few words. But first, I want to make sure everyone is aware of something parallel that's happening right now. So there is an Alaska Angel Conference, meaning there's an opportunity, this is the second time we're doing this in Alaska, for Alaskans to invest $5,000 into a pool of funds to make an investment into an Alaskan company. And the last day that we're going to be receiving those contributions, those commitments, is the 29th, Saturday. And it's timed so that if you're interested in this possibility, in this concept, and these are approved by the state of Alaska solicitations to allow us to be able to announce that this is possible, because we can't just beg people for money. We had to get permission, and we're not begging you for money, but there is an opportunity for you to consider making this investment, which is an opportunity for us in Alaska to grow more individuals that have the know-how to be able to invest in entrepreneurs in Alaska. And so you learn how to do that by starting out small, is what we're proposing. And this is this angel conference that is starting now. The deadline for all of the entrepreneurs have already applied, and we have 13 entrepreneurs that are seeking funding. And we have until the 29th for investors to be outside. There's a place to sign up, and you all know all of our contacts. You have until Saturday. If anyone has participated in the Alaska Angel Conference last year, can you raise your hands? Can you look around the room? See, there are people that have done this before. Talk to them if you're considering this as well. And of course, we have our angel experts. So with that, I want to bring up our Will Fowler, and he's going to talk super briefly about the session that we have at 10:30. Will.
Great. Hey, everybody. So I'm leading a session on Angel Investing 101. So if you're curious about what it is at all, like what is this thing that we call angel investing, come find out. If you're a startup and you want to know what are investors thinking about, what do they need to know when they're looking at my company, come find out. We're going to do kind of general overview, and then each session we'll get a little bit deeper. So we'll do overview of angel investing, then we'll do what due diligence is like, what are the things that you really need to know before you write the check, and then we'll do how do you get a good return. So once you place that investment, how do you get a lot of money back for the money that you put in? So please come join us. We would love to have a ton of people in there, and we'll have a lot of fun in those sessions.
Thank you, Will. And just to make life complicated, we have an equally compelling choice, which Dr. Sarah Traynor will explain.
Thank you, Brian. Your second option is a deep dive, really looking into what are your questions about climate change and climate impacts, and how can we answer those for you, and begin to move forward into you making an action plan for your business or your world. So you heard a lecture by John Walsh yesterday. You heard a lecture by Allison Bidlack today. They will both be with us in the room next door, as well as a wealth of experts, both on the local governance and cultural governance. We have Ray Paddock and Kenneth Weitzel from the Tlingit-Haida Central Council. We have economists. We have Tom Thornton, who also spoke this morning, will be there. We have climate experts, a range of climate experts. Jenny Eckert from Sea Grant will be there. We have also Franz Muter from the university here in Juneau on fish populations. A range of experts will be there to answer your questions. And then the second half is going to be a chance for you to start thinking about what are all these impacts? How are they all connected? How does it impact my world and my business? And this is sort of setting you up for the second round of deep dives, which will be in the afternoon.